Hello everybody, Zip here. I've got a little bit of a different video for you today. Today we're going to look at battleships versus destroyers. So, get this nice, shiny new battleship, lots of guns, lots of armor, but slow and vulnerable to something that's very quick and nimble. So the destroyer. So if the destroyer is allowed to get close to your battleship because your team fails, or just there's a lot of destroyers on both sides, such as this battle we're going into right here. This video is basically how to help prepare you to deal with that. I never sweat it when there's lots of destroyers on red, even if there's not a lot of destroyers on green, and even if the teams are very imbalanced, I don't really sweat it too much. Hopefully, after you're done watching this video, you won't sweat it that much either. So, I'm just going to go over some battles here, key points. I'm not going to go through the entire battles for each battle here. I'm just going to cover the main points. So first thing you want to do when there's lots of destroyers and you're in a battleship is load up high explosive. Get it loaded as quickly as possible. Pick a side where you're going to be pointing your guns, where the most likely avenue of approach from the destroyers is. This way you're kind of ready to go. Make sure you don't go full speed out. Let your cruisers and destroyers earn their keep by being out in front and spotting those destroyers for you, and basically train those guns in, give some lead. Make sure you make every shot count, because the closer those destroyers get to you, the more likely you are to get hit by a salvo of torpedoes. So the key is kill them fast and early, at the very least weaken them so that your teammates can take them out. Your goal is to inflict as much damage as quickly as possible to destroyers, and luckily their lack of armor makes this fairly easy to do. Your gunnery skills will have to be up to the task, and that's going to be a critical part of dealing with destroyers, and relying on your secondaries. Don't forget your secondaries. On most battleships, secondaries will be plentiful, and most secondaries will do a good enough job against destroyers to basically seal the deal, or cause fires, or do enough damage that your next full salvo will wipe them out entirely. So don't forget you have secondaries. The Texas is probably the only battleship that doesn't have a solid array of secondary guns. So with the Texas, be a little bit more cautious. But most other battleships have enough secondaries along with their main guns to deal with destroyers effectively. Here you can see my angle against, I'm trying to close the range, so that way I can get inside that minimum arming range for the torpedoes, as well as present an angle that will minimize the torpedo strike and potential damage. So I think I got out of that one okay. I'm not going to avoid these ones though, but that's okay. I'm ready with my repair kit and my emergency supplies to minimize that damage, and then I can just finish this guy off and move on to the next target. It's very important to be situationally aware and know that you will take hits by torpedoes. And the key is to deal with that as it happens, and you want to hopefully reduce the number of destroyers as much as possible, so the number of torpedoes that you actually have to dodge or get hit by will be minimized, because if you don't do that, you'll just be swarmed and then you're done. So the key is to kill them as fast as you can to avoid being swarmed, and once destroyers see that you're prepared, you're aware of them, and then you're shooting and hitting them regularly, and you whittle down their health very quickly, they'll usually just turn away, which gives you a lot of time to avoid their torpedoes, because they're further away. The standoff distance is greater. The further an enemy is, when they're launching torpedoes, the greater deviation you can affect by your speed changes and maneuvering changes. So keep that in mind. It's really important to approach these situations in a complete and total mindset. You want to do everything right if you can when you're in a situation where you've got a lot of destroyers running around in a slow ship. Ideally, in a balanced team, you're going to have cruisers and your destroyers batting up front for you, keeping the red destroyers at bay. But of course, with lots of bots still in the game at the higher tiers, and with lots of new players, I'm putting that nicely, it can be challenging that when you're running a battleship, you may wind up doing things pretty much on your own, taking care of business because nobody else is. They've all run off to go do something or other, and they've left you to your own devices. This happens a lot in the game, unfortunately, but it's still a new game, so I think that'll change over time when people realize that working as a team is always better than playing as a bunch of individuals. So some of my initial advice here as well is letting your team, your destroyers and cruisers go first. They're screening ships, so that's good. They're going to spot the enemy destroyers. That's also very good. You want to position yourself in such a way that you're going to be able to get broadsides on these destroyers to maximize your damage. And one of the surest ways of doing that is to go on an angle behind your friendly ships. And usually what will happen is the destroyers, as they're coming in, will turn slightly or they'll power through. Either way, if you put yourself on an angle, you'll be in a better position more quickly to shoot at the broadsides of the destroyers to cause maximum damage. And this is important when dealing with destroyers. You want to make every single shot count. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but you have to get those shots on. They have to count. If you don't do that, if you let the destroyers the longer the destroyers survive in the battle, the more likely you are to lose if your destroyers are not likewise still in the battle. It's just a simple numbers game. And in the case of destroyers, because they can control so much territory on the map, they have map control by default. They can control a greater section of the map. So you have to really, they're powerful in how much ground they can cover so quickly. So against two teams with lots of destroyers, if you're in a battleship, the more you can swing the balance towards your team's favor for knocking out destroyers, the better chance you have in winning. Now, destroyer-heavy games are going to be low-damage games because destroyers themselves don't have a large hit point pool to knock out, so you will not be getting huge credits or huge damage numbers from these types of games. Luckily, they don't happen so often that it's going to be that much of an issue. Consider it more something like a personal challenge in these situations when you're running a battleship to rise to the occasion. So here you can see I used my secondaries there. I'm going to use them again. I'm waiting for that ship to turn before I use my primaries because I want that broadside. That broadside is going to knock them down much more quickly than shooting him head on. So there I was turning so hard and reversing and concentrating so hard on my gunnery, I actually let myself come to a complete stop, which is a moronic thing to do with all these destroyers around. I paid for it with some serious damage. Luckily, I didn't pay too hard for it because I was able to knock out that destroyer. But in any event, yeah, when you turn really hard, try not to stop like that. That was a bad move on my part. I didn't pay too dearly for it, but it's a good example of things to watch out for. But remember, try to get that broadside. Use your secondaries to harass and to nibble away until you get that really nice main battery shot. Make the main battery shots count as much as possible. If you don't have a good shot, don't shoot. Hold back. Use your secondaries as a stopgap until you get that nice broadside shot, and then let loose with your main guns. That way you can do maximum damage to that destroyer and knock it out as quickly as possible, or at the very least damage it to the point where your teammates will knock it out very quickly. So moving on to I sped things up here a little bit on the video, double speed, in order to just play out the rest of the battle since it was so close to being done. I never get another shot on that Sims. He's way too far away. I do knock out the carrier and we do win the battle, so that's the important thing there. But you can see my damage here, 32,000 damage in a game where I feel I did pretty much pretty well in terms of my gunnery, but just my targets just didn't have a lot of hit points to draw on. So now when you're shooting, it's important to on small targets to give your lead, to watch your angles. I'm going to do another video soon on gunnery, advanced gunnery techniques, and that's for another day. Right now, I'm just preaching the situational awareness as well as the use of high explosives, and watching your angles, making your shots count is vitally important. I'll move into this battle here. This is another thing. I saw this destroyer coming into screen, and immediately I forgot my target. I could finish that guy off pretty quickly, but I've got bigger fish to fry here. I've got a destroyer who's gunning for me, so I gotta turn and minimize the damage from those torpedoes by dodging one. I take a couple hits, but not too bad. Again, because of my angling, I helped minimize that damage, and I'm expecting him to pop out here. He doesn't. He pops up a little bit ahead of the island in front of me, but I'm watching for him and I'm ready. And he pops out here, and now I'm in a bad position. I've got to turn very, very hard. And with the speed of destroyers, it's very hard to predict sometimes, and the better destroyer captains will do the unpredictable things. How quickly you observe and adapt and change what you're doing will dictate your success in dealing with destroyers. So if you can change quickly on the fly what you're doing for a changing tactical situation, you'll do better than captains who can't do that. And remember, use high explosive, try to angle, turn as hard as you can if you have to get those guns on target, but you have to do what you got to do when you're facing lots of destroyers. In the real world, engagements weren't always well planned out, even sides, so I do kind of like the challenge of having these types of battles. They are fun. They're some of the funnest battles you can have, so hopefully you'll come away from this video looking forward to your next destroyer heavy battle in a battleship. Cheers. Thanks.